Grayson, first things first, thank you for taking the time. Before we get
Absolutely.
into the new album, I'd like to jump back to the beginning. Now, I did see a list of like 5 albums that kind of changed your life, but growing up, was there one thing that kind of got you into this path of music that made you want to be a musician?
So the moment where I decided that I want to start playing guitar and pursue creating music of any kind was I was at my grandmother's house over the summer staying with her when I was like 10 years old.
Hmm.
And the music video for Shania Twain's Man, I Feel Like a Woman came on. And up until that point, like I never really heard much rock music or anything like that. I was predominantly raised on country music and like older music like that.
Sure.
And in that music video, her band's all playing like flying V's and double neck SGs and stuff, and it's just really badass looking. And I saw that and like I liked the song already, but seeing the visual like that, it was like, okay, I want to do that. And I immediately like ran and grabbed my grandmother's landline and called my mom while she was at work. And I was like, I need you to give me guitar lessons. And 2 or 3 weeks after that, like I started taking lessons. Um, at first I didn't really even know like what to listen to or like what to find because I didn't have the internet or anything. So it
Hmm.
was still just mostly country music. Um, and then there's songs like that I'd hear on the radio that were guitar driven songs like Beverly Hills by Weezer and things like
Right.
that. And I'd heard Smells Like Teen Spirit and like kind of the essential things that still would get radio play. And I think those were kind of like my first introductions to starting me on a path that would eventually lead to where I am right now.
Because just quickly in between, what year were you born?
I was born in 95.
95. So yeah, so I was gonna get to some of those 90s bands that eventually had
Hmm.
a big influence on this new record, I think, as well. So when did you kind
Hmm.
of expand from Shania Twain and kind of the country music you grew up with to the type of music and for instance bands like Alice in Chains and Smashing Pumpkins that ended up being a big influence?
Yeah, it wasn't too long after that.
Okay.
So like I started playing when I was 10. I turned 11 just a little bit after I started. And like I said, I didn't really have like my own computers or anything like that to research. So the only thing that I had was guitar magazines. And so I subscribed to like Guitar World very early on. And those magazines are kind of more catered to an older audience. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the bands that they would cover in them were older classic rock bands. And so my first real like obsession over a group or over a band was with ACDC.
Okay.
And Angus Young became like my idol. I looked up to him in every way, and that became my first favorite band I ever had. And so I kind of started there. Then that obviously led into like Metallica and Ozzy and shit like that. And then that would eventually lead me into Pantera. And Pantera was really the one that like changed it for me because it was that level of aggressiveness and heaviness, both instrumentally but also vocally, that I just had not heard before. It was a completely new world than what I even understood existed before.
Sure.
And that kind of started once you get into this kind of music, there's a part of you that's always like looking for like that next high of like, all right, what's like that next craziest thing I can find. And so that's about when it started for me when I was about 11 or 12. um, and it's still like the only way for me to find that was scouring through those guitar magazines or like going to the only record store that was in with like within 100-mile radius of where I lived. And I would just go to the CDs and look for like the album covers that I thought looked cool, or the ones that had the like for fans of stickers on them. And I would try to find something that like I just was hoping I would like because I didn't have a whole lot of money to buy it with, anyways.
Sure.
And so it was like Pantera at first, and I got Cowboys from Hell, and I would bring it to school every day for like my music class to play. And then I think the first more like modern heavy band that I got into was Under Oath,
Okay.
and I got Define the Great Line. And I remember when I got it, I still didn't fully, when I first listened to it, I was like, I don't get this. It was still like a little too far
Mm.
for me. But I was like, I know there's something here. I know there's something cool because like there, I was reading about it in places and like it was getting recommended to me by people. So I like gave it the time and I sat with it and eventually like the odd time signatures and like just the chaos of it really started to like make a dent on what I was looking for in future music. Um, but I'd say the Pantera era into like Under Oath was kind of the first time where I was like, all right, this is the path that I'm going to go towards.
As you were progressing both on the instrument and as a musician as a whole, as your kind of palette began to expand, to what extent did you start to create yourself? Did you start to write your own riffs or write your own songs? When did that kind of come into the picture?
It started pretty early, honestly.
Okay.
I a lot of people, you know, that I've talked to and that I've met that play guitar, play any instrument, I found like most people like actually learn a lot of songs that they
Sure.
liked when they were growing up, and like they learned how to play all their favorite riffs and um, covered all their favorite bands and things like that. And I don't really know why, but I never really did. I would learn kind of like bits and pieces of stuff, but I would never sit down like, all right, I'm gonna learn all of like Battery today or something like that, or I'm gonna learn like this whole record front to back and like find a drummer that I can play the song with or something like that. I would always more so learn like part of a riff or just like sort of learn it correct, just so I knew like where their hands were at on the fretboard or anything like that. And then I would just take the information that I got from
Mm.
sort of learning it and immediately try to apply it in my own way. So I started like writing my own songs, I guess you could say, like almost immediately. They it was mainly just, you know, power chord progressions and things like
Sure.
that. But I was always more interested in like creating my own music and my own art rather than just like being able to play the stuff that I like. So I've always tried to use more of like my influences and things like that. I've never tried to deep dive on them too much because I never wanted to fully understand what they were doing. I wanted it to be more of like I hear what they're doing and I have to put it through my own filter to
Mm.
try and recreate. If I wanted to copy that, I wouldn't know how to, you know?
That's very interesting because, like you say, and for me as well, when I started playing guitar, you just start playing riffs and songs that you like. But for me, that creative element never came to it. It's interesting that was kind of the immediate direction you went to. So if
Yeah.
you, I don't know if you still have any of those recordings or have listened to any of those early ideas, but if you in your mind kind of compare it to where you are now, how do you see that development from this young kid just playing power chords and stuff to where you are now?
I mean, there's definitely a huge difference, but it's still pretty cool because like I can still hear like I guess what first naturally comes out. I can still hear that type of stuff. Like if I
Sure.
ever find an old video or like I've got an old like recorder sitting around somewhere that I had like a couple things on tape that I tracked, and you know, it was nothing. None of it was crazy. It was all like pretty like basic radio rock type riffs. But even just like the way I can like my hand naturally wants to slide and do things like that, or like the
Mm.
way I bend notes, it still is kind of the same from back then in some instances. So
Okay.
it's kind of cool to hear that there's been like, even if the quality and the creativeness of the riff is like exponentially, you know, more thought out now, there's still elements behind like my basic mechanics as a guitar player that I can hear like from start to finish now.
Right. Well, I'm forwarding a little bit throughout your history, but once I think you joined Norma Jean in 2018 ish.
Yeah, like the very end of 2017 was kind of when I
Okay.
first got linked up with them. But yeah, basically 2018.
But and you knew the band well. I read somewhere that was one of your favorite bands. So how did you kind of, when they asked you, or however that happened, what was your idea about it? And did you have that idea of, okay, I want to contribute creatively from the get-go?
Yeah. So yeah, they were Norma Jean has always been one of my very favorite bands. The town that I live in is relatively small, and there's nothing really around it. Nothing really comes out of it. It's kind of just like a big truck stop.
Okay.
Honestly, there's a major highway that goes through it. It's just a lot of fast food places and like one restaurant.
Like strip malls
So
and stuff.
no, we don't even really have strip malls or
Okay.
anything like that. But I remember, I think I was like 12 or 13, and somebody had told me about Norma Jean, and they're like, you know, their singer lives in our town. And it kind of just blew my mind that anybody that did anything could come from where I came from. And I think that was a little bit part of what drew me so much to them at the first was like, oh, this is like a real band that's doing real things. It's like in my direct scope of life. And so I remember like going to restaurants growing up or driving around town with my parents and seeing Corey, you know, driving in his truck around town. I thought that was the craziest shit ever. And so I also knew that like if once I decided like, all right, I'm gonna actually give this a shot of like trying to play in a band and travel and do touring stuff. There wasn't much of like an actual music scene or anything that I grew up
Mm.
in. There was one, but it was very DIY, and it never really left the small circle that it
Right.
operated inside. So I knew that like my one shot was to get Norma Jean. And so I just basically obsessed over it. And I bought all the same gear they had, all the same guitars and pedals. And I catered my playing and my style and my songwriting to be like somewhat resemblant, you know, of what
Okay.
they were already doing. And because I was like, this is my only ticket to get like where I'm trying to go. Plus, I love this band anyways. And my my old band that we did like local and regional stuff. We had kind of gotten to know Corey over the course of like 2 years or so. We bought one of the old Norma Jean tour vans, and Corey did like a guest spot on our one record that we put out. So that kind of started like the relationship, and it just kind of like naturally formed to where, you know, Corey let us open up one of the Norma Jean shows before
Okay.
I left on a tour one time. And I was in college at the time, and Corey texts me and he's like, yo, can I call you? And I'm like, yeah. And I kind of was like, what is this going to be about? And he has this habit of doing things where he asks questions that answer other questions that he's not asking. So he like, he asked preliminary questions to know whether to keep asking the real questions. And so he starts kind of asking me about my local band that I was in, and like kind of baiting questions about how serious I wanted to take music and if I wanted to tour and things like that. And um, I guess I gave all the right answers, because then the next question was, well, would you want to come do this tour with us? Like fill in for Norma G. And I was like, hell yeah. And uh, so, you know, he was like, all right, well, I'm just kind of putting feelers out there for a few guys to see who's interested in it. And he's like, I'll definitely keep you updated and whatnot. Gave me some basic details. And then was somehow expected to go back to my like economics class and sit down and like be able to focus, which I wasn't able to do at all. So I like, I think there was maybe like a 2-3 week window from that period to the point where he was like, all right, you got the gig. And after that point, I was just like, I didn't really even know, like, it didn't feel real almost at first, because it was
Okay.
like, it was like I threaded the needle perfectly, and I really didn't believe that I was gonna be able to, with all things considered. Because, like I said, I felt like there was one option, and I just was like lucky enough and blessed enough that that one option presented itself to me.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because you describe it as kind of the one ticket that you felt you had. So
Mhm.
What was the ambition in a way? But even before Norma Jean came into the picture, what was that notion that you had of yourself as a musician?
Um, I never. I'm pretty like grounded in logic and like
Mm,
reason. So like I did never had any like I think too overly ambitious ideas of what I was
okay.
trying to do. Um, I just honestly wanted to travel and play music in front of people. I was never like, I never really thought I'd be able to like pay bills with it or anything like that. I never thought that I would be able to like have a nice house because of it or anything like that. It was always just, I want to do this thing a lot and in different places. And this seems to be the best way to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, that it was always pretty like, I just wanted the bare essentials out of being in a band.
So anything that comes with it then is a bonus, right? And then you
Absolutely.
keep expectations under control, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm like admittedly sort of a pessimist, which is
Okay.
sometimes good and sometimes bad. But yeah, I kind of do subscribe more to the like keep your like expectations low and you'll get surprised more often.
But
Whether that's
what
good or bad, I don't know.
no, but what I find interesting, and then this thing does fall in your lap in a way, and you take that opportunity. That first tour, and this is the last about that period, but was it daunting for you, or was it kind of trial by fire, or did you kind of take to it very well?
I'd say all of that
Okay.
because um daunting, yes, for like, it I had done like touring before, but not like on a real like national level. I'd done like a full US tour, but it was broken up into like three or four legs, and it was a very DIY band that I was playing with at the time. And um so that was an aspect of it. I'd never done like a full month straight. And I was like 20, 21 or 22 at the time. So I was also like just quite a bit younger also. Um it was daunting from a sense of like gear that I was gonna have to
Mm.
use. When Corey first called me, he's like, "Are you good with like, lots of effects pedals and things like that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm use them all the time. I'm great at it." And I didn't do it at all. But I was like, "I'll figure it out." Um, so that was a little bit daunting. Um, I'd say a lot of it did come like pretty naturally and easily to me because this was something that I had envisioned and imagined and prepared for like 11 or 12 years leading up to that point, even though like I obviously didn't know all the inner workings and the
Sure.
mechanics of what being in a band like that meant. I was always mentally like just absorbing anything I could to like better prepare myself for it. And then the hardest part was honestly like I just went so over the top with trying to prepare for it that I kind of shot myself in the foot because I was playing about 9 hours every day when I first got the gig just to try and learn all these songs because he sent me a list of like 30 songs. And at the time, there was going to be like a couple shows before this tour started. And so it was going to be a whole different set list and things like that. And it was only like 3.5, 4 weeks to learn it all.
Right.
So I was playing about 9 hours a day, like scouring YouTube for any videos I could find so I could like zoom in on the hands and make sure I was playing the right thing. And I just overworked my body and got crazy tendonitis in both
Okay.
my arms and like got carpal tunnel in my like wrists in that. And it really messed me up to the point like where I couldn't play guitar anymore. And I had
Okay.
to, luckily, those shows leading up to the tour got canceled. So it gave me like a bigger window of time to
Mm.
heal. But I had to like completely stop playing guitar and just sit on my couch for like about 2 months leading up to this time. And it was
Okay.
the most nerve wracking experience because I felt like, here's this opportunity that I've been working for a really long time. And like it finally presented itself. And right before I'm about to get to do it, it's like it feels like the rug's getting pulled out from under me. And I did all this crazy like red light therapy on it. I went to so
Okay.
many different like massage therapists and things to try and work on it. And we spent a whole lot of money trying to fix my arms because a lot of it wasn't covered by insurance. And luckily, I got to the point where I could start playing again about a week before rehearsal started. And it didn't feel good, but I was physically able to do it. And so it all worked out fine, obviously. But all those like feelings and like kind of bumps that I had to get over in the process definitely made it like a mixed bag of experiences with that, you
Sure.
know.
But I can imagine as well, even though it's very difficult to deal with something that straight from the get-go, it must have hardened you in a way where you kind of realize, okay, now it's serious. Now I have to take care of my body. I have to take care of the way I play, and then that
Mm-hmm.
kind of, I suppose, prepares you as well for being in a band like Norma Jean.
Absolutely, 100%. That's like I've had to like become a lot more disciplined
Right.
with what I do because now this is a job, now this is a career, now this is something that a lot of other people depend on me for and rely on me for, and it's something that more than anything I just love to do, and I want to do it to the best of my abilities for as long as possible. So, yeah, I've had to learn how to like be more in tune with my body and how to like have more realistic expectations of what I can physically do. I'm still young, but like
Mm.
I have a bad habit of being like, oh, I can power through anything. Like I'll deal with the consequences later. Well, those consequences like come back quicker
Right.
now, you know?
Yeah, I think especially when you're younger, there is a certain level of confidence, and you think, okay, nothing will ever happen to me. I can continue playing, for instance, until the day I die. But then something like this happens, and you know, oh, okay, so something can happen.
Yeah,
So that's a good realization, I think, to have early on. So moving to
absolutely.
the new album then, because what I find interesting, I wrote down a thing that Corey said. I saw it in another interview, and he said something about you saying, I've never seen him more determined with this process for the new album. So, one, is that true from your perspective? And two, what if so, what kind of gave way to this commitment or this kind of notion of, okay, now I'm going full force, because you did contribute to All Hail, the album before.
Yes. So I would definitely agree that like at least so far, this is definitely the hardest that I've worked and the hardest that I've gone on anything that we've done creatively. And I think it was from a place of like desperation. I think it
Okay.
was from a place of, I know it was from a place of anger. I know it was from a place of um, wanting to help my friends at the same time, also, because, when I first started writing some of the stuff for this record, it was just like things were going normal. It's still 2019.
Right.
All Hail just came out. There's a lot of hype around it. Like things were feeling good. 2020 was going to be like a huge year for us. But I was like, all right, let's just get a jump start on the next thing, anyways, because I'm feeling like ready. Um, and so some of these initial song ideas, like Sleep Explosion, I think that was one of the first like real demos that I created that
Okay.
actually ended up on the record. And so, some of the ideas were born just under natural circumstances. Sleep Explosion, the basis of Penny Margs, and like maybe one or two others. But then, 2020 hits a wall, both with just like canceling our touring plans and like our whole album cycle for All Hail basically got shot.
Sure.
And that it almost felt like because that record in itself was also like a really hard time to create and make happen, and it felt very defeating, that we didn't get the reward of all the work we put into it.
Sure.
So then, we're going through 2020, and then like we have all these um internal and like I guess slightly external really bad things going around our band, and um it just put me in a headspace that I've never been before. It kind of opened my eyes a lot to the world that like I've decided to operate inside, which is like the music industry and the people that are also in the music industry. And I just had a very naive look at it, I think, before, because I was young and thought everybody was my friend. And then the people that Corey's one of my best friends on earth. And I realized that, your actual circle of people that you can trust that's around you that actually care about you in return is a lot smaller than you think. And I think we all kind of collectively figured that out. Me, Corey, our drummer Matt, and then Corey's brother Matt, also, who works a lot with us.
Sure.
And so kind of from that point on, there was definitely a period of time where like I didn't even touch a guitar for a while. I was just really depressed. We kind of all were. And I had like no creative spirit in me, no desire. But then there was a point where I was like, all right, fuck this. We're gonna do something about it. And the only thing that I can do about it is sit down and like start writing some stuff again. And it wasn't just for me, it was for Corey. Like I wanted to give him the best thing that I had to offer because he's the highest caliber of a creative mind, of a songwriter, and of a just straight up vocalist that I think I'll probably ever get to work with. So I never ever want to take that for granted, and I don't believe I ever will because I hold him with such high regard. But it was like a thing of like, all right, I want to create these things for my friends, for us to do, to kind of band together here and like to give them the best possible platform for them to use their incredible talents on top of. And so a lot of that time was spent, me in my room. I never sat down and was like, oh man, I'm so happy to like play riffs today. I can't wait to write riffs today. It was always like coming from a place of like anger. I was like, I'm mad. I'm mad as hell. And this is the only thing I can do about it. This is the only way that I can get my like own type of justice, or like in some cases revenge, was through like creating the best possible thing that I could produce. And that was kind of the whole mood and the vibe throughout the entire creating process of the record. The at-home writing parts, even when I would meet up with Corey and his brother and we would, do some more in-person writing, it was still always like there was a huge heaviness and a huge like importance that was never absent when we were creating this. It never was just like, oh man, like we're gonna make a cool record. It was always, this record like is kind of a really big deal for a lot of reasons, both like emotionally, both like it was always a statement. The record, I said from a very early point, was a reaction. It wasn't just like the natural thing for a band to do 2 years after their last record came out because their label told them to. Like, this record was 100% a causation of things that happened before it. And even in the studio, I think that's when it really kind of came to life. In that quote that you mentioned with Corey, I remember day one of once we started tracking guitars, and I think the first song that I tracked was Spearmint Revolt. And we like got some basic amp tones and stuff like that, and then it was just immediately I was like, all right, hit record. And I just basically, from that moment until the day we left the studio, I was like all day every day in that chair, just hammering out everything, because I tracked all the guitars and I tracked like most of the bass, because Corey does some of the bass parts too. And I remember him telling me, like, at the end of that day, he's like, when you started tracking the first song, he's like, I was like, shit. He's like really going for it here. And like, hearing him acknowledge that like effort and the intensity that he saw, it really helped me be like, all right, like this is being recognized and like it's coming across the way that it was intended to. And it just kind of, it was like, all right, this is all for a purpose. I'm gonna throw everything that I mentally, physically, emotionally have into creating this record. And yeah, and I did it with him. You know, he was always sitting right behind me and right beside me, so he saw it firsthand. Like I was, you know, not standing up for like 6, 7 hours at a time because there wasn't time to. We had a
Right.
pretty small like recording window, so I was just constantly hammering out this record, like giving our producer every possible like combination of tones or combinations of like variations of riffs to work with so that we could piece together like the coolest and best version of the song with like the most dense production value also, because we'd quad track just that everything just to make
Okay.
it sound like a wall of guitars.
Right.
um but yeah, all that to say, like, yeah, I don't think that really anybody could have put more effort or energy into like making sure this record happened other than we did.
With that in mind, then, because I don't have time to talk about specific songs, I think, and a lot of other journalists will do so. But what I find interesting then is what was the feeling then once it was finished? Because you mentioned the build up and the lead up, not feeling creative, then kind of this anger pouring out through being creative, but through playing guitar. And then spending so much effort in the studio. So was it very cathartic once it was finished, or did you kind of fall in a hole
um
again? Did you kind of, okay, now I have nothing to do again? What was
yeah,
the sense when you were done?
so it's kind of hard because there wasn't like when we left the studio, it still wasn't like done.
Hmm.
We left the studio the first time and we went home for a month, and then me and Corey went back, just us two, to another studio to finish up vocals and like some extra guitar parts here and there. And so then we were there for a couple of weeks, and then we went home again. And then even after we came home that time, we were still in like his brother's studio adding things to it.
Okay.
So it was kind of like almost a 3-part process of actually finishing the record. There was never like a deadline, or there was a deadline. We just never met it really because we kept being like, all right, we want to do more stuff. Um, but and I guess the kind of weird part was like one day we were just like, oh, I think we're done. I think that's it. You know, so there wasn't like a lead up, like
Hmm.
a mark on the calendar. We're like, oh God, it's getting closer. It was just like one day we're like, okay, I think we should let this be what it is now. And after that point was decided, and after we like actually like felt like it was gonna stay that way, that's when I was kind of like, what now? You know, like I've just spent the past year and a half like only thinking about this and like literally nothing else. Like this is the only thing that I could think about. And it was a very like weird time because, you know, I didn't know all the feelings, all that anger and all the like um need to like voice truth and voice like um reality, I guess, like was still there. And the
Hmm.
desire to like feel heard and feel justified was still there, but there wasn't an outlet anymore that was like an outlet that I felt like was going to be heard at least. So it took a while to kind of sit back in that, and then I kind of we had to transition, I think, some of that outlet in rather from writing and recording into the mixing process of it, and into just like helping create the best final product, not
Right.
just musically, but you know, production
Artwork.
wise, artwork, yeah, videos and all that stuff. And so then you have to kind of turn on a different part of your mind that like, at least for me, like that's not my like, you know, my forte. I feel like I'm pretty good at being involved in those things, but obviously like the songwriting is number one spot for where like
Hmm.
I feel like I can contribute with ideas and things. So it was a little bit of like, you know, you got to turn down the heat a little bit with everything you're feeling, and just be able to focus on creating a good packaged record at that point. And then, you know, even after all that was done, after the final mixes were turned in, after the artwork was approved and all that, like that's when I was really like, what now? Because the release date, you know, we hadn't even set a release date yet. And I was like, am I just supposed to sit here like wouldn't like on top of this record that I recorded a year ago at this point? And that was like the hardest part. But luckily, once the release date was decided, the rollout was pretty fast and it was like pretty like, you know, one thing after another. So it felt good. It felt like it was just like a quick ramp up into like the album ultimately coming out.
Yeah, and I suppose now you have that outlet that you mentioned, kind of in playing live. I suppose now that's become part of the kind of catharsis, I suppose. Then that you now get to show those emotions on stage and get them out that way.
Absolutely.
There's 2 minutes left in this stream before it shuts down, so hope maybe we can squeeze this in. I read that Spearmint Revolt, that the album title is obviously in that song, and but also that you wrote the lyrics. So very quickly, I don't know if you can see the timer up top, but what led to that little sentence, that little, that for
It,
especially Deathrattle, that kind of notion.
yeah, that was from a point of like when I kind of realized that like you can't trust people and like you gotta take everything like very surface level, I guess. That line came from like Deathrattle Sing For Me was more of like, all right, if you're gonna come for me or if you're going to try and take away, and it's not necessarily a me thing, is this a lot of this stuff was in regards to Corey and the things I was seeing happening around him and me being so angry because I know that dude better than most people on this earth will
Right.
ever know him, and that's why I back him so hard and I always will. um so that line was more of like, if you're gonna like do all these like shady things behind the scenes and you're going to try and cause negative things to happen to another person, at least like be loud about it. Like, you know, really do it if you're gonna do it. And so that was always more of the attitude behind it. Like, come and fucking get me. That was
Fair enough.
always my attitude behind a lot. I wrote a good chunk of the portion of the lyrics on that, and that's kind of what they were all about. You
Okay.
know, was it on it like it's a little cheesy, but like the movie 300, the scene where like, you know, at the end where there's like a handful of those guys left, but they're still charging towards like a sea of people. That it was like that attitude encapsulated into like a line was what I was going for.